When Caitlin Clark joined the WNBA, it was eagerly awaited by the supporters in addition to experts as the college's brightest star. Basketball is bringing fresh perspective to the women's professional league. The memo was not sent to WNBA veterans, who primarily greeted Clark upon joining the league, using a combination of physical protection, insulting sayings, and the simple taunting, although this is comparable to the manner in which many rookies are treated when they initially leap to the large. Because with Clark, everything is increased in size, thus the quantity of trash talk has skyrocketed, yet the competition. Players in the WNBA are rapidly realizing that it might be wiser to avoid prodding the bear because they are discovering themselves more and more on the losing side of a game of revenge. With Caitlin creates 3 logos for each adversary who had earlier made fun of her. She is communicating with those who could one day dare to challenge her. This indicates that a superstar is in the creation, particularly in light of the pace at which Clark changed into many basketball styles and a lot greater degree of competition, while almost everyone acknowledges that she is capable of achieve success at the greatest level possible. Physicality and toughness have been questioned in the press as well as early in her rookie season on the court. Clark became a WNBA favorite target, gamers looking for attention, and even as she played, her treatment continued notably better, and she began putting historic figures to her credit. Clark remained elegant and never appeared shaken when talking about any opponent, and began retaliating when larger and older. She was roughed up on the list by players. Among Caitlin Clark's detractors are players with a variety of profiles, including from seasoned superstars to fellow newbies. Apparently, a lot of WNBA players believe that are superior to Clark yet incapable of support their offensive remarks and deeds. The most prevalent motif when it comes to seems to be disparaging a player as gifted and driven as Caitlin. Clark is probably going to highlight the natural-born scorer in. Let's examine a few examples of terrible talkers who are trash. WNBA players' actions backfiring on the Chicago Sky's Dana Evans is a fierce guard who compensates for the absence of size by fiercely competing and never abandoning the play. When her group confronted the Indiana Fever and Clark in the smallest WNBA regular season game, the point guard was only 5 to 6 feet, demonstrating to the novice that it's not simple. In the professional league, points are awarded. That's what any rival would attempt to accomplish, but regrettably, Evans went above the distinction between playing aggressive defense and fighting on the street. Simply take a look at this collision that resulted in several very intense feelings between players from both teams when Caitlin sped past her and went up to the basket that Dana Evans had locked elbows to the novice and essentially smashed her into a defender that was waiting. Read more about stout Chindy Carter in A Human Sandwich was the end product after a minute, wherein Clark was shattered by 2 rivals and was fortunate to stay clear of severe harm that wasn't entirely as some words of choice were used to describe this was not picked up by microphones. An emotional outburst could have caused the assurance of a less skilled player, but for Clark, it just gave some additional inspiration to avenge her tormentor. Here's what happened when you scored whenever you wanted. Minutes following the foul swish. With his constant swishes, Clark is obviously not readily frightened, and she is more than prepared to put up with some physical suffering to demonstrate her value as a basketball player rather than searching for reimbursement in the form of tangible dispute that she just took charge of the contest and reminded everyone of the reasons she is among the most dreaded athletes with. She is holding the Chicago Sky ball, intended to trick her into losing her temper, but ultimately lost the match, partly because to careless fouls on Clark's WNBA. Caitlin is not being chirped at by players. Clark just after they're fed up. They are her offensive feats. frequently criticizing her defensive plays as well, even though she was criticized for being delicate and ill-equipped for physical. Clark receives the heat as well when she begins using the same type of physicality that she frequently exhibits, exposed to a single circumstance when that was quite obvious that she was running with. Kahleah Copper is a prolific scorer who plays. Following her drive for the Phoenix Mercury, was halted by a foul to get to the basket. Committed right away by Clark Copper. Began spewing nonsense and made an effort to get in Clark's face when the circumstances are. Never declined to the point where would put the players it serves in jeopardy. An excellent illustration of the double standards that Caitlin must coexist with each and every night. The video makes it quite evident what occurred, but regrettably we don't has a record of the words that were spoken in the moment's heat in any basketball game. When you need it, your coach would say, if you want to commit a foul, you should ensure. When the opposition fails to score, that's what Caitlin Clark actually done on that play. Kahleah Copper reportedly didn't believe so and took into account the contact to be so extravagant as to be filthy. She responds with a lot of power, and she had to be kept apart from Clark, who stayed composed and simply said that it was simply a foul before leaving to avoid more disputes. While we're unable to assess Coppa's thoughts when she responded to the foul, thus it's reasonable to inquire whether her opponent's identity contributed, and if she would have began speaking in such a combative manner that had she was fouled by someone else in her typical way. Caitlin chose to allow her to play, speak in spite of all the provocations that didn't alter her move, and engaged in a steady game that contributed significantly to an additional fever triumph before the home crowd. The score stayed close until the very end quarter, but Clark and her teammates don't allow the Mercury to make a comeback. When it came time to finalize the agreement, Caitlin SK expertly made her way through several double teams and selflessly threw the ball to teammates who were open instead of, rather than attempting to win by becoming a hero herself. Her last help of the evening was genuinely beautiful. She is playing literally with the defense and fully understands everyone's whereabouts, who will emerge from the court if she assaults the basket. It is a little unexpected that Alysha Clark, some of the most prominent trash talkers, Caitlin Clark is opposed by seasoned players who ought to be more aware, but however you're caught in the moment and exhibits subpar athleticism. The Las Vegas Aces guards sportsmanship. Alysha Clark is an example of this because she has won the WNBA 3 times, 3-time champion of the Israeli League and the current 6th-place female of the year in. At the old age of 37, the WNBA player has no company giving out inexpensive injections to novices, but throughout the game against the Indiana Fever worried her a lot. She's being scored on by Caitlin Clark, who just gave her a head slap. The footage that follows shows her in a really poor lighting, therefore she should definitely be embarrassed to have behaved in such a manner on the basketball court. In addition to Clark, make an offense that shouldn't be a component of the game at all, but following when called for it, she flees in a angry outburst, suggesting that she blocked the shot neatly, which is just bullshit. Caitlin's head is actually visible, bob back and forth following the collision, so Alysha must have known that she made contact, displaying a shocked and irate expression regarding the referee's call. Feels completely dishonest, and to be honest, it's more appropriate for a novice than an expert veteran holding a hardware prize. Once more, it's difficult to accept that she would have acted in such a manner had any her victimization of another player careless transgression, but given that there is an latent hostility toward Caitlin, she couldn't get Clark across the league. Simply put up her hand and say, I'm sorry. The reality that someone must act as an Caitlin Clark is an adult in this scenario. Assume that duty as you could see in the first video, she simply checked to make sure her eye was fine and then convened a meeting to be ready for the play on without any drama or pursuing. Around the court, Alicia Clark doesn't. She pretended to be a street tough person and took the foul in stride and proceeded directly. If anything, go back to playing basketball. The only thing the foul did was rouse her awake and aid in improving her focus because she wasn't playing her best game prior to being struck. Later, she increased the tempo and began to place the ball in the basket. Here is a considerably more efficient. The way she appeared for the rest of the compete with the aces using her arsenal of deep shots and deft passes were prevalent. Exhibit, and she completed with a double. Double once more with 11 and 13 points. Assists, the score was somewhat under her average, and it was insufficient to prevent a defeat by a powerful aces squad that is presently occupying the second position in the Western Conference, which includes the final. AIA Wilson's MVP of the year, which is why we is unable to claim that Caitlin Clark actually not yet exacted revenge for this offense, but she will have 2 more opportunities to do so prior to. Now that the season is finished, we can anticipate those games to be an actual show for the admirers, particularly in light of how much Caitlin has done better since the first game in the early going versus Las Vegas. The July Seattle Storm is an additional squad that resolved to test Clark and came to an end. Ended up paying a heavy price for this error during a matchup between Caitlin and Indiana Fever. Several players attempted some rough house strategies in an attempt to slow one player's momentum in Clark's specifically behaved in a manner that's not accepted even in a community playground, much less a professional one. Transmission of the game to a nationwide audience. Victoria Vivian, a Storm shooting guard who, up until last year, they were prepared for the Fever, disapproved of Clark's offensive, attacked, and began speaking inanely. While the two were reboarding defense following yet another deep 3 by Clark, the sight appeared really unappealing and might have grown worse if it weren't for Vivian's teammates, who quickly received between Clark and her in order to avoid an increase of the domestic audience at the Gainbridge Fieldhouse's response was rather loudly in response to Vivian's effort to raise the local hero, but ultimately the passions calmed one somebody who wasn't especially enraged. That would be Caitlin herself, who left with composure from the commotion and proceeded directly to her coach since the event. When playing Seattle in the second quarter, 6 points ahead, there was an abundance of, there is still time for Clark to gather her forces and change the course of the game. She did that in admirable style, and the game turned into fairly biased the remainder of the way. Let's view a selection of Caitlin's finest excerpts from the showdown versus Victoria Vivian's during the Storm in Seattle. Basically, Clark did everything she could in order to control the game, drives to the basket, shots from a distance of several feet. Even crafty is the 3-point line. Plays on defense that led to steals. After everything was said and done, Clark had 9 assists and scored 23 points, compared to 9 minutes at 0 points by. More significantly, the Fever prevailed for Vivian's by around 20 points even while entering the match much worse than Seattle in the rankings at the time of the match. Closely examining the first half of the after Clark, the result was never in doubt. The team was lifted after flipping the switch onto her shoulders, which ought to be sufficient to warn Storm gamers from making mistakes in Caitlin's thoughts, but it still has to determine if they took the lesson to heart. Given that the two teams compete in distinct conferences and don't have a consistent season games left, their upcoming meeting is probably won't appear until the next season. Terasai, Diana, is among the most distinguished athletes in the women's division. Renowned player who has been the ideal point guard position in 3 WNBA players in her generation championships, and she received an MVP award, name on which she is qualified to comment. anything she discovers in the game. Still, she appears deserving of her attention. To overlook the fact that she is at the rear of her distinguished profession and that she cannot keep the mantle for very long. Her response to the arrival of a lengthier, highly anticipated rookie class led by. Although Caitlin Clark was comprehensible, the appearance of Mojo Terasai doesn't actually match her current level of expertise. This is how she greeted the youth, the league's phenomenon when she was performing. Media appearances prior to the WNBA season began. Reality is approaching, all right? This item has many tiers that we all experienced it, and you can see it on the NBA side, and you will witness it. On this side, you appear extremely human. Competition with 18-year-olds, but you're going to arrive with a few mature women who been participating in professional sports, playing basketball for a while, but Diana's words don't seem particularly hurtful. She has a strong belief that she is still above the novice's head and shoulders. That could have been the case 10 years ago when Terasai was 42 years old and still in her prime. Aged, she's not exactly in a position to intimidate young players with. A reminder of reality, the difference between reality and perspective become clear once it was time for everyone to witness. Caitlin Clark and Diana Terasai will meet on the court for basketball and play against her straight a few months later. She had the opportunity to do so, but circumstances didn't go as planned. Here's how. In their first meeting, Clark set her on fire. Formal WNBA gathering that concluded with a Indiana Fever's decisive victory. Caitlin Clark of the squad nearly missed a triple, dual finishing with 12 points and 9 rebounds and assists, while Terasai did help the Phoenix score 19 points. She couldn't guide her Mercury squad to triumph and essentially had to consume. When she spoke, Clark's brilliance was fully displayed. Show and her total number of assists demonstrate because she declined to become embroiled in an particular conflict and searched for her. When the defense overreacted, teammates, to the possibility that she would shoot while Mercury has resorted to detesting no. Carter, Cheyenne, team and Caitlin Clark are more at odds compared to the Sky in Chicago, and there are a few athletes who voluntarily accepted the villain in this nerve-wracking battle. Cameron Carter is one of them. He's a tough and unyielding athlete who enjoys being the team's enforcer and occasionally goes so far in trying to discourage, preventing rivals from entering the paint. Although Carter is an excellent player, her real basketball is frequently overshadowed by antics, attributes, and make her the news for all the incorrect reasons. A lot of stated of her egregious foul on Caitlin that happened during a dead ball, Clark, yet it continues to be among the most obvious instances of unsportsmanlike behavior. Let's examine the situation against the youngster. This happened again in a renowned clip. Immediately following Caitlin's significant, Carter's three-point shot was so chindy, evidently irritated, and discovered a horrible way to demonstrate that this isn't even a playing basketball means you can't defend it. For any rational explanation, it appears to be a obvious effort at physical coercion, something that is rarely seen on men's and women's basketball courts. Competition in the contemporary era, she was whistled for an egregious infraction during the play, allowing Clark to score extra points earned from the free throw line and eventually causing harm to her own team. After losing that game, the Sky was ultimately won the season 3-0 series to combat Fever, so she made an attempt to didn't manage to get Clark to stop her rhythms, precisely provide any favorable outcome, while Carter was comparatively tactful and kind in her post-match remarks and denied harboring animosity toward Clark. Despite her aggressive deed, she nevertheless received the title of an online Caitlin hater. A smarter girl would have attempted to maintain silent for a long, but Carter is clearly lacks the ability to effectively manage her feelings and managing distressing results a few months following her well-known Caitlin Clark Carter shoved. Another dubious item to supply. Fuel for people who think she's resentful about the youthful sensation. This time, a list of the most important. ESPN has released WNBA players, which has. Caitlin Clark was 12 places higher than. Carter did not congratulate those who. Carter, who was given a higher ranking, sent an extremely sour message on social media how I often spend less time in my league leading stats, yet I am at the bottom. The hate isn't getting worse. Carter's writing on her official. She made no mention of her Twitter account. Her name is Caitlin Clark, but she insisted that she has the league's best stats is nothing less than naive for. In contrast, Carter's average is 16.9, along with 1.4 points and 2.8 assists, whereas Clark has 17.9 steals per game, league-leading 8.3 assists and points. ESPN data show 1.4 thefts per game is well warranted in Caitlin's ranking, superior over her older adversary and identical. For other WNBA players, it might be stated that show up close to the top of this list as considerably. Carter seemed to regret Clark, but she is not even her fiercest opponent on the Angel Ree, a member of the Sky team, has taunting Caitlin dating in the past. Reminiscent of their time in college, the two are contending right now for the Rookie of the Year honor, which provides an additional tier to an ongoing soap opera that has been years. Angel is at least worthy of being commended for confessing openly to her provocations on the court, the competition with Clark, and she is a little more cultured when speaking with the media. In this place is a really intriguing statement she made about the subject of where trash talk's boundaries should. It's clear that individuals don't comprehend, such as if they believe it to be personal. However, when I understand the nuances of this teammate went to play for, I will compete against another team. I'm going to disparage CH for no other reason than, despite my intense competitiveness, I believe that's just a part of the game. Like trash talk, attempting to normalize. It's fine to talk, but not to take it personal off the court. It is clear that has emerged, and people are simply attempting to give the impression that it's something, but Caitlin and I are in love. Her abilities, and I respect all she's completed satisfactorily, with some sense, or it would have rested on conversation, but she did not, and while playing a game against, she committed a blatant Caitlin Clark foul that has sparked a media frenzy around. While this foul was epic in scope, admittedly it was in line with the game, it led to yet another blow to the. We can observe how the head for Caitlin transgression occurred in order for you to your own judgment as to whether it was inspired by Angel's animosity at the. Caitlin, the Indiana guard, was unfazed and continued as though no action was taken to adjust her headband, and we wonder why she's giving her coach a high five, but whether she may have made a little mental observe that she needs to pay off a loan. She went up to the next Chicago Sky matchup versus Chicago with some additional urgency and nearly reached a 23 points and 9 points for a triple-double. Let's appreciate the 8 rebounds and assists. Highlights of Clark's performance in this game that, as you can see, fever ultimately prevailed. Many pieces of evidence show that rubbish talking to Caitlin Clark is ineffective. The girl's veins are icy and doesn't waste time brainstorming punches and taunts she received from her opponents. She refused to back down and debunked a lot of her critics, but never had to express herself verbally because a basketball whiz doesn't need reasons. In spite of a track record history of performing better when pushed, Clark will probably still have to deal with sporadic occurrences like those we just talked about. How she handles silencing haters are flawless and will ultimately. She simply needs to keep hitting prevail. More of those absurd pictures and accumulating significant victories after some time. WNBA gamers will be aware that they are participating in when they act with fire. Ridiculous to provoke Caitlin Clark.